Omaha's news leader, chronicling the stories and people making a difference in our community. This is KETV Newswatch 7's Chronicle.
Preparing for your future can be daunting, but rewarding no matter where you are in life. Good morning, I'm Rob McCartney. Today we're tackling different financial questions and concerns we face at each stage of our lives. And we're going to focus each segment of Chronicle on specific age groups. And in an effort to make sure children are ready to tackle financial questions, the 2023-24 school year will be the first one where Nebraska high school seniors will need to take a financial literacy course in order to graduate. First, you know money is at the forefront of many conversations, particularly now because of things like fluctuating mortgage rates, student loan forgiveness, and a big one, of course, inflation. We have seen an incredible roller coaster over the past decade. These are the inflation rates from 2014 to June of this year. The Federal Reserve likes to keep the rate around 2 to 3%, and you can see it really spiked in 2021. It's impacted Americans' day-to-day life, including things like housing, grocery, other utilities, because as inflation increased, the average income has not grown at the same rate. Take a look at these numbers. This time last year, when inflation hit 9.1%, income growth was 6.7%. But we're now starting to see some relief. Income's at 5.6%, with inflation dropping to 3%. But Americans are still trying to recover, and despite the relief, it's harder for people to save or prepare for an emergency or get ready for retirement. That's one reason the average retirement age among Americans has risen over the past 3 decades. In Nebraska and Iowa, it's 65, which is a year later than the national average. U.S. experts point to a lack of savings and reduced Social Security benefits as important factors. Also impacting when you retire, what you want to do after you're done working. If you're planning to travel or live someplace with a higher cost of living, you might have to work longer to afford that lifestyle. Right now, the average Social Security monthly retirement benefit is roughly $1,620, and for a lot of people, that barely covers living expenses. That's why it's important to have money built up, or at least a plan for retirement. Unfortunately, many Americans aren't saving enough, and again, we are looking at separate age groups this morning. And joining us now to talk about challenges and opportunities for those who are middle-aged or older, let's say, financial advisor John Schutz. He is a partner at SOAR Wealth Strategies. John, thanks so much for being here.
It's great to be here. Thank you.
Right off the bat, what are some things people who are middle-aged and older should they be doing to prepare financially?
Well, number one is really get a clear picture of what you want that retirement to look like, because it's those last 5 years before retirement and the 5 years in retirement where we see the most angst by people. You know, you're transitioning from that accumulation phase of your life to, John's telling me I can spend that money now, but I'm not really sure.
Right.
So the things that we use an acronym at SOAR Wealth Strategies. It's SOAR. Okay. And the first thing is your support system. So who are those people that are important to you? Do you have kids that need to go to college? Do you have a special needs child in the family? Are there grandchildren you might like to move closer to? Those type of things. Then the O is occupation. Now, a lot of people their identity is wrapped up in their occupation. I mean, if you're Rob McCartney, you know, and you leave the news, what happens after that, right?
Good question.
We can talk about that. But a lot of people really don't think about, well, when I have 7 Saturdays now in my life, how am I going to spend those? Is it going to be all watching TV? That doesn't turn out well sometimes. So the A stands for aspirations. What are those things that you would like to do? Are there hobbies, charities you'd like to go to work for, those sorts of things? And then the R is kind of that catch-all of recreation. A lot of people want to travel. What are those things that you want to do? I'll be playing a lot of pickleball. But
it sounds like there's a lot of soul searching or a lot of sit-down conversations you have to have here, right?
Well, absolutely. And one of the things that we find that people don't really know a lot of times is that budget. And I know you have a guest on later today who's going to talk about that a lot. But, you know, we'll go through a retirement goal and say, okay, how much do you spend per month? And at the end, we say, do you have that much left over at the end of the month? And the answer is a lot of times no.
Okay.
So you really need to get a grip on what that budget is.
Is there a good way to do that? I mean, I know there's There's computer programs out there that'll say, okay, here's what you spent on utilities, food, whatever.
Right. A lot of times people will use now I'm not advocating using credit cards for everything
Right.
unless you pay it off every month. But a lot of time your credit card will tell you where you spent things. So, just tracking it for a few months is a good idea, and then just multiply that do it for 3 months, multiply it by 4, and we got a pretty good idea of what that number might be.
Are there common mistakes people make when they're looking at preparing for retirement?
Yes. Yeah. I think the biggest one is people really underestimate the cost of healthcare in retirement. Okay. And so what are those things that you can do? Well, first off, let's talk about Medicare. Medicare starts for most people at age 65. Okay. There are some exceptions to that. But if you're going to retire before 65, how are you going to bridge that gap to Medicare? It's very expensive in a lot of cases. Now, Fidelity says a couple over the age of 65 should expect to spend $315,000 in health care costs now. And when you think about long-term care costs, which are through the roof, that becomes a big part of it. So I always recommend that people talk to a Medicare expert and somebody who can offer you multiple lines of Medicare supplements, because those people can really help sort through, well, this plan might be better for some people and another plan might be better for others. And then if you have access to a health savings account at work, I strongly consider using it, because it is probably one of the most effective planning tools that we have in our arsenal.
So those are things people can do, say they're 15 to 20 years away from retirement, right? That's what they should be doing now, immediately?
Well, I think that's, that getting that budget really solid for your retirement is really important, that 5 years before. But 15 years out, hey, save as much money as you can, obviously. I mean, that goes without saying, but I think working with a financial advisor, I am obviously biased in this area. I am a financial advisor. But know that budget, invest more, and talk to a qualified financial advisor. And one of the things I tell people, well, how do I find a good financial advisor? Talk to people. And if folks like their financial advisor and recommend them to you and they're doing these things for you, then check them out at finrabrokercheck.org. You'll be able to see where that financial advisor is licensed, if they have any disclosures on their record, which you generally don't want to see.
Now, if kids have moved out, and so now we're right at retirement, right? You're empty nesters. What do you do? I mean, can you take all the money you were spending on your kids and just roll it into the retirement?
Well, hopefully that's when really people start to accelerate their retirement savings, because now the kids are off the payroll, right? So that's what we see a lot. And now, I don't want to get too deep in the weeds on the Secure Act that was passed last year, but there were a lot of good things in that Secure Act that allow people to put a lot more money away. You can put up to $30,000 away in a 401k if you're above the age of 50 now. So take advantage of those things. And if you're working and your company has a 401k and does a matching, I have no investments that will double your money from the point that you put that money in it. So take advantage of that matching of your 401k.
Is there such thing as retiring too soon? We've heard stories of people who have to come back out of retirement. I mean, that's the fear, right? Right,
and it always is. And I tell you, when I talked about people having that anxiety as they retire, sometimes it's not even rational. I'll know there is no way you're running out of money, but people are hesitant to spend that money. On the flip side, the statistic a few years ago was that 50% of people over the age of 50 had zero retirement savings. And that is a difficult thing to overcome. So, get started early. That is the biggest thing. Rule of thumb is if you save 10 to 16% of your income over your lifetime towards retirement, you'll be able to live the same lifestyle in retirement that you lived before retirement.
So finally then...
So you got to start that early.
Right. Now, I'm saying, is that the takeaway from this? Do it early, do it now?
Yes, absolutely. Because, we don't have the graphic here, but if you just start saving early and stop after 10 years, you'll still be ahead of a lot of people who start later and start contributing more money. There's a lot of studies that have been done on that. And then I think the last thing I would tell people that's really important is last year we had a really rough market. There was no place to hide in investing. Fear sells. The power of loss is 3 times greater than the euphoria you get from gains in investing.
Sure.
So that psychology of investing, you know, you're going to hear a lot of commercials that are going to try and get you to do things or not invest. And I just never bet against the American economy.
Gotcha. All right. John, appreciate you coming in today.
Thank you.
You bet. Still to come, millennials and Gen Zers. We're looking at financial issues facing them, including budgeting. We're speaking with an advisor about proactive steps that can be done to tackle their challenges. It's when KETV News Watch 7 Chronicle continues.